Hey, it's Jordan with TYT Politics here in South Florida, where we've been covering this man's campaign against Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Tim Canova, he's a law professor down in Florida, and you have waged the first primary challenge Debbie Wasserman Schultz has had in her over a decade, I believe, congressional campaign. So I wanted to start out, you and I have interviewed remotely, but one thing that really struck me is you, similar to Bernie Sanders, were kind of foreshadowing a lot of the things that ended up happening with our economy as early as the 80s. You were writing op-eds about deregulation, about the Federal Reserve, and you know, a lot of things you were talking about ended up happening. So I wanted to talk about your past and also what were the signals that you saw that apparently all the wizards in D.C. and on Wall Street kind of missed.
Sure. Yeah, I think I look back to my college education and I studied government and economics and history, and I think it was the combination of the three. If you only studied economics, you might not have had the historical perspective, and bringing in the historical perspective, you see that it was a similar cycle that was happening in the late 70s and early 80s. By what I mean by that is the deregulation of Wall Street, the deregulation of interest rates themselves. Folks now don't even remember that for many decades, interest rates had ceilings. For instance, on savings accounts. And by having ceilings on savings accounts, it meant banks would be lending money at lower interest rates, and it was a more stable environment. That deregulation started to occur in the early 1980s, first under Jimmy Carter and then accelerated under Ronald Reagan, right when I was getting out of college, working on Capitol Hill. So I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why I maybe saw things that others didn't. My father was from that greatest generation, Depression era, World War II and post-war. So maybe, and I was brought up at home with a better understanding of history.
And another thing that was interesting about you is in talking to some of your volunteers, talking to some of your advisors, they said that when you've been on panels kind of debating experts about everything from the economy to the Fed to all these things, I mean, pretty much you knew more than them. A lot of people don't realize, because the media has painted you out as just, you know, some guy in Florida primarying Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Right.
But since you kind of know the economy pretty well, you have expertise in these fields, what do you think, if you had to pinpoint, is the core thing, core aspect that has expanded the explosion of income inequality? I mean, you've seen starting in the 80s, you started seeing that chart that there was a funneling of money to the wealthy. We know it started under Reagan, but I kind of want to get from you, what was that core thing?
Well, I think there were a combination of factors. I already mentioned the deregulation of interest rates, and higher interest rates have a tendency to redistribute income from those who are debtors to those who are net creditors. And I remember listening to John Kenneth Galbraith in the early 1980s when I worked on Capitol Hill. He always brought that up, that monetary...
Who's that?
John Kenneth Galbraith had been an economics professor at Harvard University for decades, but prior to that, he was in Franklin Roosevelt's administration. He was his price czar during World War II and the period of price controls. And he was President Kennedy's ambassador to India. So he had a very long, distinguished career. And he was one of the great Keynesian economists of his era. And he always made that point that monetary policy is not socially neutral. So when you start having a more active monetary policy, which means higher interest rates, you do see these massive redistributions that occur, you know, day and night, so to speak, because of the way debt works. At the same time, you had these massive tax cuts in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan. You had other big tax cuts for the wealthy, for the top brackets under George W. Bush. That's another powerful way to redistribute income. And then the job situation. You know, we've been dealing with decades now of massive high long-term hidden unemployment and underemployment. So I think those are three of the main factors, and a lot of the reasons for this high unemployment has been related to trade and globalization. There are ways to have a highly globalized environment that doesn't decimate your manufacturing base, but you know, we've sort of accepted this free market cartoon depiction of what globalization should look like.
Right. And I think when you look at Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who frankly, the last few years has been more so fundraising for the Democratic Party than operating as in her congressional capacity. I mean, we know the story. Her biggest donors, like Hillary Clinton, come from banks, private equity. She flip-flopped a little bit on the whether you should have tighter regulations on these payday lenders, which negatively affect mostly low-income people.
That's right.
African Americans, Latinos who need that cash injection quickly, but
Yes.
they have bloated interest rates. She keeps talking about the middle class. I was at an event today, middle class, middle class. It's, however many times you could say it. With you in Congress, it's still divided. You still have extremist Republicans. How are you going to kind of actually bring something and deliver something for the middle class, whereas she's just talking?
Well, talk is important, backed up by action. I think most people, when they really listen to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, they realize it's just talk. When they hear me speak, they understand that I'm speaking the truth, and there needs to be more truth talking up on Capitol Hill, and there needs to be people that are not just repeating empty slogans like the middle class, but actually backing it up with actions to fight for organized labor and working families, and to do that both in legislation that they introduce and in arguments that are made in favor of other legislation.
Could you kind of give us a window into some of those fights you've waged, since you don't have a political record?
Sure. So I've been not just writing about the Federal Reserve, but I've been very active on it for some years now. I was on a advisory committee that Bernie Sanders put together in 2011. So I've been aware of Bernie Sanders' politics for a lot longer than obviously he ran for president. And the reason he selected me to be on this advisory panel was because of years of hard work, of publications, and activism on the Federal Reserve itself. As a professor in the 1990s, I was working advocating for capping interest rates on payday lending. That was in New Mexico when I was on the faculty at the University of New Mexico. During those years, I was writing about the Federal Reserve and really taking a look at the Fed and how it had changed over the years. And this was what I brought to Bernie's committee and what I've been writing about before and since. When you compare the Federal Reserve and how it responded to the 2008 financial collapse to what the Federal Reserve did in the 1930s, it's like night and day. After the 2008 financial collapse, in the first 2 years after the collapse, the Federal Reserve made $29 trillion in low-interest loans to the same Wall Street banks and hedge funds that had created the real estate bubble and collapsed the economy. And the interest rate on that $29 trillion in loans was about 0.25%. My students are paying 7, 8, 9, 10% interest. So what Main Street has to pay for credit compared to what the Wall Street banks that had collapsed the economy, two very different things. So you're rewarding failure and you're punishing the victim in the response to the crisis. You see what the Federal Reserve did during the 1930s, where the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks were actually making loans directly to Main Street businesses, to small businesses. I've advocated the Fed making loans directly to infrastructure banks so that state and local governments could finance their infrastructure without going through the bond markets and paying high interest rates, but to have very low interest rates that are fed to these infrastructure banks by the Fed. I've also written that the Federal Reserve should be providing very low interest rate loans to multi-employer pension plans and to public sector pensions as well. Debbie Wasserman Schultz voted for this Multi-Employer Pension Reform Act, which is essentially now imposing austerity on about 400,000 workers and their families, many of them Teamsters. So it's a very different model of finance. The way I look at it, and I've written about it in these terms, it would be like the public option in finance. In addition to reorienting the Federal Reserve towards Main Street instead of Wall Street, we also need a federal infrastructure bank. And again, this is grounded in history. During the 1930s, 40s, 50s, we had the Reconstruction Finance Corporation at the federal level, which helped finance so much of this country's building, from LaGuardia Airport to the Midtown Tunnel and 100,000 schools and hospitals around the country. And we're one of the only advanced industrial countries now on the face of the earth that doesn't have an infrastructure bank. Germany and Japan and even China do. And those countries have much more modern airports and other infrastructure than we do. We have an aging, crumbling infrastructure at a time when we really need to modernize it, whether you're looking at Flint, Michigan and their waterworks, or the challenges we have here in South Florida with rising sea levels and what that does to the infrastructure here. I am heartened, at least, that Secretary Clinton, Hillary Clinton, has recently talked about the need for a federal infrastructure bank. But what gives me some caution is that Bill Clinton in 1992 and Barack Obama in 2008 also campaigned for a federal infrastructure bank. And when they got into office, there was no push in Congress to follow up with that. If I'm elected, there'll be a big push from me, that's for sure.
Bill Clinton also campaigned on the forgotten middle class and then repealed Glass-Steagall,
Right.
among other things. So
Yes.
talk is cheap. I kind of want to ask a general question that focuses on the national election, but I think also is pertinent here. As I went around the country, you see this generational gap where supporters of Hillary Clinton, not all of them, but her wheelhouse was kind of like above 45, older, more situated people who obviously everybody's got economic issues, but most of them don't have $300,000 left in student loans.
Right.
Whereas Bernie Sanders, a lot of his supporters, not all, were millennials, people just tuning in for the first time to politics, inspired by him. Mm-hmm. I've seen that in this area too. Mm-hmm. We're not knocking seniors. I mean, they've done a lot for the country and still do. But your district, 23, is a lot of senior citizens, and a lot of them generally vote for establishment Democrats like Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Are they missing something in terms of what she has actually done for the area, but also what for their kids and their grandkids, what putting Debbie Wasserman Schultz back in office is doing?
Right. I speak to a lot of senior groups, and our message is resonating. So I feel good about how we're going to do on Election Day with seniors. Yes, we have a lot of support among millennials and boomers, but even seniors. And when you talk to them about their issues of what they're concerned about, Social Security is a big one, and the fact that Social Security has not been keeping up with inflation. And I've been making the point that Debbie Wasserman Schultz hasn't done enough to support increasing Social Security benefits, giving it a cost of living allowance that keeps up with real inflation. And only recently has she come back and, you'd say, responded to my criticism.
During the debate, she kind of gave lip service. That's laughable that, my constituents know everything I've done.
She said it was silly, and she pointed to half a dozen bills that she's co-sponsored that actually would raise Social Security benefits and tie it to a cost of living increase. And what she neglected to mention, and I did mention in our one and only Sunday morning early debate, was that those co-sponsorships all came within the last 4 to 6 weeks. So, it's taken a primary challenge to get her to do her job and really represent the seniors in this community. And they know that. They know that not enough has been done to take care of them. And then when you talk about really poor, struggling seniors and disabled folks, there's the Supplemental Security Income Program of Social Security, the SSI program. And this is a safety net for folks who are making $11,700 a year or less. And in Miami-Dade and Broward counties, where our district is, that's 124,000 seniors. It hasn't been, the benefits have not been raised since Richard Nixon's administration. And for more than a year, I've been advocating raising this. There's an SSI Restoration Act that Senator Elizabeth Warren introduced and Bernie Sanders co-sponsored. We're still waiting for Debbie Wasserman Schultz to do her job and to co-sponsor the House version of that. So, I think everyone's up for grabs here. She's never had a primary challenge before, and I think she never thought she would have a primary challenge. And as a result, she just kept her pattern going of taking millions of dollars, actually. I mean, this has been PolitiFact-checked, and the Center for Responsive Politics has a database of this online at Open Secrets. She has taken millions of dollars from the largest corporations and Wall Street banks for years and voting along their interests and pushing their interests. And I think she thought she would never be called to account for this.
I believe I just read $68,000 from the payday lenders.
That's right. So $68,000 from payday lenders. She had been pushing a Republican bill in the House that would have prevented the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, President Obama's bureau, from regulating payday loans. She was pointing to Florida as the model for the country. The Florida law was written in 2001 by Debbie Wasserman Schultz when she was a state legislator, and it's a terrible law. It's been denounced by consumer groups and by civil rights groups. It allows interest rates of over 300%, traps folks into a cycle of debt, and it's an income transfer from poor, vulnerable people to wealthier interests. And, you know, you look at it and you think $68,000 for a politician doesn't sound like that much money. Why would she really do that? So where are the payday loan lenders getting their money from? And you see that there are lines of credit they have with big Wall Street banks. And instead of it just being $68,000, you look at the hundreds of thousands of dollars that Wasserman Schultz and her political action committees have been taking from these big Wall Street banks who are part of the scheme. They're making good money, good profits on these very high interest rates.